Why do so many people believe this stuff? Because people like to fit in, and people don't like to stand out. Now, behind the scenes, I've spoken to quite a lot of doctors who kind of agree, but they will not go public. They will not say this publicly.
Coming up on British Thought Leaders, part 2 of my interview with Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who talks about the manipulation of medical research.
This is real cognitive dissonance. This is real matrix, red pill, blue pill type area where, you know, you can all wander around taking the blue pill and everything's wonderful and the world's shiny and bright, but actually underneath it all, people don't want to know this, and I understand that they don't want to know this. They want to feel safe, and they should be safe.
Dr. Kendrick explains how expert reputation and money distort the world of medicine.
Especially in the area of drugs that are used long-term, lifetime use, preventive drugs that you're taking forever and ever. These are the ones the industry's most interested in, because it means millions of people are taking them for years and years and years, and the money just rolls in.
You quote Dr. George Mann saying
Yes.
this diet hypothesis is the greatest scam in the history of medicine.
Yes, yeah.
How do we get to this point where so many experts are so wrong on such a kind of enormous issue?
Well, that's. I think if we could explain that, we could sort the world out at the same time. Ideas are remarkably powerful things, and stories. I'm actually doing a presentation. I'm changing a presentation at the moment, trying to turn it into a story. Here's a story: is that we, started a long time ago. We find cholesterol in plaques, which actually got there in a completely different way. Someone comes along and tells us that saturated fat raises cholesterol. We don't have any other explanation. Then the pharmaceutical companies come along and say, look, we can lower cholesterol with these drugs, and the heart disease rate goes down.
Because of the statins.
Because of the statins. And then you've got every part of your story you need here. Why look for anything else? And then, of course, what did happen, in the end, as I said, statins have sold, there's $1 trillion worth of statins. They're still selling billions, even though they're off patent. And the new drugs that are coming along, they've got the very catchy name of PCSK9 inhibitors, lower cholesterol even more, and their studies apparently showed a greater increase in risk of heart disease. Right? And if you look at those studies, they are interesting, which would sort of take me to the doctoring data side of things, which is, how can you make a sow's purse look like a sow's ear look like a silk's purse? They do things with statistics that are just clever. But
Clever in a good way or a bad way?
I sometimes use the example of during the Cold War. This is a joke, by the way, it never actually happened. The Soviet athlete and an American athlete are pitted to race against each other by their various regimes to see which is the greatest form of humanity, communism or capitalism, and whichever way around you say it's the same. But in this case, the American runner wins, and it's reported by Pravda as American comes second from last in major international race. Russian finishes runner-up. All right, that's true, but it's really completely misleading. And that's sort of how they present statistics in clinical trials. They're true, but horribly misleading.
Because it's a widespread problem we have, the manipulation of medical data. Yes,
is the answer to that. I mean, there's huge amounts of money involved here, and they don't want a negative trial, right? And so they will, and they know already if they're not going to show something, they start changing what they're going to look at. So, if you're taking a drug a statin, you want it to stop you dying. That's the figure you're interested in. All right, that's the figure they're not interested in, because they know it ain't going to change. So they start measuring other things. So they call these combined endpoints. So they'll measure hospitalization with angina. This is just in cardiovascular. By the way, they do this. This is everywhere. They do putting in a stent or not. They do heart attacks, non-fatal, strokes, non-fatal, and they might put in cardiovascular mortality as well, just to make it sound like but they will never put this alone. They combine this with this, and this, and then give you this combined figure. And it sounds like there's a great benefit, but there's actually no benefit. It's just, but I mean, I hope I'm explaining this clearly enough that you're understanding, and I know people will start looking at me going, take me through this again. You know, part of the problem is, I know it's so clear. To me, it's so clear. It's my life, my life of looking at these things. And you know, someone said, "How do you read a clinical paper?" to me once. I said, "What I do is, the first thing is I do, I look at who wrote it, right, in cardiovascular disease world, and then I look at who funded it, all right, and then I look at the title, and if it says something like an explanation of, I go, nonsense." Or if it doesn't include things you're interested in, like overall mortality or cardiovascular mortality or really important things, I go, well, they didn't change, because if they did, that would be bang, front page headlines. Cardiovascular mortality reduced by 60%. That would be what they'd say. When they're not saying it, it's because they can't say it. So when it's not there, it's really important. So I look for the things that aren't there. Does it happen in other areas? Well, of course it does. You know, I don't know these other areas as well. I can't quote you examples straight off the top of my head, but it's really happening everywhere, unfortunately. I mean, I can understand the pressures that come about to do these things, and I can understand the difficulties of achieving major important effects. But really, we're in a world of, you know, as I said to somebody the other day, we've got all these drugs now that everyone takes after having a heart attack or a stroke, and to prevent heart attacks and strokes. And the rate of heart attacks and strokes and death from these things is going up. So how effective do you think these drugs are being, these wonder drugs? If statins were really wonderful, why? And more people are still on statins now than have ever been. Why is the rate of heart disease going up? Because it's not working, is it? It's the only explanation. You know, let's look at things simply. That's the only explanation. So we're, you know, I know people find this hard to believe. This is real cognitive dissonance. This is real matrix, red pill, blue pill type area where, you know, you can all wander around taking the blue pill and everything's wonderful and the world's shiny and bright, but actually underneath it all, people don't want to know this, and I understand that they don't want to know this. They want to feel safe, and they should be safe. I'm not saying all of modern medicine's bunk, because of course that's stupid and no one can say that. But when you're coming to especially in the area of drugs that are used long-term, lifetime use, preventive drugs that you're taking forever and ever, these are the ones the industry's most interested in, because it means millions of people are taking them for years and years and years, and the money just rolls in.
So we're talking about money distorting the world of medical research.
Of course it is. Yes, of course it is. I mean, I have quotes, and I can't remember them off by heart, but I give them in a couple of talks. One is Marcia Angel, who edited the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the #1 impact factor journal in the world. It's the one that has the most influence. It's the one that will go into the newspapers, that will be quoted most. And she basically said, after editing this journal for 20 years, I can no longer believe the medical research that is published or the expert guidelines that are created. I can't believe these anymore. If anyone knows, she does. And Richard Horton, who edits I think he's still the editor, The Lancet, basically said, we know that a great deal of the medical information that's published is false, perhaps up to 50%. Really? I would say that's an underestimate. He said, science has taken a turn towards darkness. This is the editor of The Lancet, right? And the editor of the BMJ for many years, Richard Smith, has written extensively about manipulation and corruption of data that's published, right? These are the 3 highest impact factor journals. These guys have edited these journals for the longest, and they are, I think Richard Smith said, well, I'm never going to change anything. I'm just going to enjoy a glass of wine down on the coast of Italy, because he's written about it, he's trying to do it. And the most famous paper in the last 20 years was written by a guy called John Ioannidis, who's at Berkeley, I think it is. He was originally Greek. And I'll try and get this correct. Why most published research findings are false. That's the title of his paper, the most read medical paper this millennia, I should say, all right? And he says almost all of the research that we find are basically just confirmation of the existing bias. And he's looked into it, and he's just said, it's basically a huge amount of it is just nonsense. And just not true. False, what's the opposite of false? Not true. What's not true? That's a lie. Of course, you can use words like false and not true, and somehow it seems less blunt than saying, these are just bare-faced lies. You know, well, they're like the lie about the Russian and the Soviet and the American athlete. They're not lies in one term. You say, no, we're absolutely right, 36%. Yes, look at the figures. I know, but come on. You know, you are just talking. This is baloney, guys, all right? And it's, I don't know how we get out of this place. I'm part of a group in the States called the Broken Science Initiative, which was set up by the guy who set up CrossFit, who got attacked viciously in the States years ago for setting up this thing of what is health, and he tried to create fitness and define fitness and put people through his fitness regimes, and he got attacked by the other group and told that people were dying and his regime was killing people and stuff like this, and he took them to court. He said he came to realize that these guys who were supposed to be the experts in their field, A, seem to know nothing, and B, will attack you on behalf of, effectively, their paymasters. Donald Trump is not flavour of the century at the moment, is he, in many ways, and for obvious reasons, but he has brought in a couple of guys, Jay Batterjee, who runs the National Institute of Health, who I've met, a fantastic guy, who really wants to get at this stuff, and RFK, who everyone just says is an anti-vaxxer. Well, he's not super keen on vaccines, but he's very, very keen on trying to help sort out the research science world in the States. And I think these people are actually going to do some good. First time that I've seen that happening. And we do need this to happen, in my opinion. It's, you know, I know when I say things like this, if a passing doctor starts hearing me saying this, they'll be like, you know, whatever it is, you know. But, you know, I have said this, and of course I got attacked by the Mail on Sunday a few years back from, they wrote articles saying that I was killing people by suggesting they stop taking statins. So by criticising statins, hundreds of thousands of people had stopped them and thousands had died. I was accused of killing far more people than Harold Shipman, for example. So I thought, well, we're not having that. 5.5 years later, of course, we were totally vindicated in the High Court that what we were saying was actually scientifically completely correct, all right? Now, I would never say, and I get very close to the bone, I understand when I say things. You know, I don't tell people to stop taking their statins. I say, here's the evidence. Right? I've written things, but the things I've written, whilst they might sound quite provocative, and I do deliberately try to sound a bit provocative, just to provoke some sort of reaction. Yeah. I never say anything that I cannot be supported by facts. When I say statins make you live 0.74 days longer, I can show you the paper, right? And I can show you other papers that show exactly the same thing. So, I mean, go back to your original question, why do so many people believe this stuff? Because people like to fit in, and people don't like to stand out. Now, behind the scenes, I've spoken to quite a lot of doctors who kind of agree, but they will not go public. They will not say this publicly. They will not say anything until the tide changes, whatever that point is. You know, there's a point. I think Malcolm Gladwell calls it the tipping point, doesn't he? Where suddenly it all changes. All of a sudden, it's gone.
So is this a mass group thing?
It is a mass group thing. It is a mass group thing. I remember speaking to Andrew Gold, you'd never heard of him, completely different area, geologist in the States. And he used to go around in the late 1940s, early 1950s, waving banners saying, tectonic plate movement is real, right? In the geology meetings, you get thrown out, got booted out, total rubbish. There's no such thing as a tectonic plate movement. Do you know when the American Geological Society accepted tectonic plate movement as the explanation for the surface of the Earth? 1967. 1967. You'd think it was hundreds of years ago, wouldn't you? Anyway, this guy was really interesting. He was a bit like me. He was like, well, why are you saying this? And challenging all the nonsense. But when it changed, all these guys that had been standing up going, throw this idiot out and get rid of him, and it's clearly, I call it the cooling crinkling theory, where the Earth cooled and bridges were created between the continents and they gradually wore away. It's got a name, I can't remember. Anyway, it's just complete bunk, you know. But they all believed this, and they all stated it until 1967, and then suddenly none of them believed it ever again. And in fact, sort of went, well, I never really believed it anyway. That change happens like that, you know. It goes. You never know when it's going to happen.
There's an example in your book about gastric ulcers.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about that one as well.
It was said that gastric ulcers were caused by stress, right? And as you got stressed, you produce more acid, and they created the ulcers, and that was the answer. A couple of Australian researchers, they said ulcers are caused by bacteria that live in the stomach, all right, and they are the cause of ulcers. And they were attacked, and many people believe they were attacked because hugely, vastly profitable drugs that reduced acid in your stomach were being promoted all over the place, all right. And he couldn't convince anybody, and in fact he actually swallowed the bacteria down at one point, Helicobacter pylori, and developed ulcers. And then he took antibiotics and other things, and the ulcers went away, and he said, that's proof. And he was still attacked. And all of a sudden, it was this thing. You can't put an exact date on it, but for some reason, suddenly they got the Nobel Prize, which probably helped.
So they're coming with this idea, and everyone's calling them crazy,
Yes.
and then suddenly everyone changes their mind.
That's it.
And they get a Nobel Prize.
They get a Nobel Prize. That's it. And well done. As I always said to you, you were a good chap. I mean, ruthless. I mean, a hero of mine, Bernard Lowen, who I don't think I've written about in any of my books. When people used to have heart attacks, just after the Second World War, the advice was 6 weeks of strict bed rest. You had to lie in bed and not move a muscle because your heart had been damaged and couldn't put any strain on it. This was the thinking. Anyway, he thought, well, this doesn't sound very good. And these guys lying in bed, unmoving for 6 weeks, they're just losing the will to live, and so a lot of them are just dying. They were actually dying from DVTs and pulmonary embolism. And the worst thing you can do for a heart is rest it for 6 weeks completely. It just knackers it. Right. Anyway, he tried to at least get the patient sitting up at the end of the bed. Right. This was called. He wrote blogs about it. It was called the chair that heals. Or anyway, other doctors marched through his ward with coffins on their shoulders with "murderer" written on it. Really, he writes about this. He wrote about this. And at one point when he came into the hospital, they lined up the other resident doctors and gave him Nazi salutes. Right? Now, he's a Jew, right? Bernard Lowen's a Jew. Okay? So, if you go against... In fact, John Maynard Keynes' brother was a surgeon, did breast surgery, who tried to get... He suggested that the radical mastectomy that women were having for breast cancer was not needed because it was disfiguring and damaging and horrible. And he got thrown out of the Royal College of Surgeons. He was attacked. I think he lost his job completely. He just became a pariah. All right. And as it turns out, of course, he was quite right. So if you're going to go against the blob, or whatever it is that it is, if you're going to go against it, and I think especially in medicine, because no one wants to know that they've been, instead of helping people for their career, they've been damaging people. It's not a comfortable thought for people. It takes a big man or woman to say, you're right, I'm doing this wrong. Very difficult. And medicine really is a very conservative world. It's a very conservative world. I've struggled to exist in it at times, as you can imagine. But I think, well, I can't change it from within. I can't change it from without, but I'll stay within. It just, there's all the factors. There's the peer approval. There's the confirmation bias.
Peer approval is kind of seen as the gold standard in research, isn't it? But
peer approval
is it playing a good role?
Well, actually, Richard Horton wrote a very good article about peer approval, saying basically everyone thinks it's this sort of magical thing, force for good, but he said it's biased, it's incorrect, it's basically just nonsense. Right? Peer approval of articles is, I think he said it is a confirmation of the acceptability rather than whether or not the idea is correct. Right? The guy who wrote Medical Hypotheses, who edited it, who I still communicate with, another man whose name is going to come to my head in a minute. He published an article saying that HIV was not the cause of AIDS. There's a guy in the States who was big on this, and I didn't agree with him actually, but I didn't know enough about it, but his argumentation didn't seem that good. But I liked the fact that it was published, right? Because I thought, well, we need these kind of debates, because if you can't refute him, maybe he's right. And if you can refute him, you've strengthened your arguments and your evidence. And this is how science should be.
What's the point of science?
The point of science is to go at things. And it's not because necessarily you want to kill them, although sometimes you do. It's because you're trying to make science better. I like to think I am trying to make science better. But after this was such a hoo-ha from the whole viral HIV community that he was told basically, right, well, you know, you're going to have to publish a retraction, get rid of the article, and from now on, your journal is going to be peer reviewed, right? I think it was Elsevier publishing it, right? And he went, you can't peer review. It's like, here's an idea no one's ever had before. Who do I ask to peer review it? Well, all the people whose livelihoods usually depend on the previous idea. As Max Planck's one that said, you know, science changes one funeral at a time. And that was in 1900. He knew, and we all know, and anyone who's ever studied this area knows, that once you've got experts at the top whose entire not existence, but their reputation, their status, their money, they get invited to give talks, is based on this idea. You know, these people are not going to change their minds very easily, rapidly, or even at all. And that is, you know, there's a really good guy who I met a few times, David Sackett, who set up evidence-based medicine, really. You mean, how can you set up evidence-based medicine? But he sort of did. He said, we're doing stuff and we have no evidence whether it works or not. So he tried to bring evidence together to say, can we show we're doing good or can we show we're not doing good when we do this? But his view on experts, he said experts should be forcibly retired after 2 years because all they do is they get in the way of progress, and they actually and people defer too much to experts. They won't contradict them partly because their career is dependent on it. And in fact, he's the only person I've ever heard of who did. He said, I'm not writing, speaking, anything about this particular area of evidence-based medicine ever again because people pay too much attention to what I have to say. And he didn't, and he took himself out of the arena. So the one person that shouldn't have done this is you. All the others are going, what an idiot. You know, it is unfortunate. Well, it's like every aspect of the world, isn't it? You have people at the top of the organization. They got to the top of that organization. They don't want that organization changing, and most of these organizations are built on hypotheses and guidelines and whatever, so they don't really want them changed. This is human nature. So you have to be a bit of an outsider to even have a go. But of course, because you're an outsider, everyone goes, well, he's just an outsider. You know? The commonest criticism I get is, well, are you a cardiologist? I go, no, but I can read. and in fact, one of the top cardiologists, who's a friend, I'm not going to mention him because he'll probably lose his career now, agrees with everything I have to say about heart disease. He'll never say it publicly. Right? But, you know, this is, I find that the barriers to change are very, very rigid, and the pressures also, they're economic now as well. There's a huge amount of money to be made.
So you're not very optimistic that we can ever really solve this?
No, I am not. It would require political will, and the public has. If my sort of dream is that I'll eventually find a thing that triggers one of these public outrage things, a bit like the post office thing, which had trundled on for 20 years and no one gave a shit, and then suddenly, oh my God, this is the most terrible thing that's ever happened. The public are not interested, as far as I can tell. Some are, a small percentage of the public are. Doctors are uninterested, almost entirely. The people at the top of the profession are uninterested, and politicians aren't interested because none of these people are interested. So if you could get a kind of a trigger point, you know, as I call it, the blazing torches and pitchforks moment, where everyone says this is horrific and it must change.
Well, this should be that, really.
I thought it might have sort of a bit more effect than it had. But I've come to realise that you're up against huge inertia and all those things that stop anything from ever happening that seem sensible. And so, well, I hope that, you know, I do interviews. You know, I'll come down into an interview, not with anybody anywhere, but I will speak about this stuff. I will write about this stuff. I blog about it. I write books about it. And I think, you know, I hope that it will hit that trigger at some point. You know, I mean, I'm not alone in this. There's other people even far more erudite and cleverer than what I am doing this stuff as well. And so there is a movement, and I said a bit like that, suddenly everything changes. You know, nothing changes, things change slowly, then all of a sudden is I'm kind of hoping we're approaching that all of a sudden point.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'll ever know it's happening before it happens. It takes everyone by surprise. It's like, oh, that's a crikey, it's gone. And I think that's the way it will happen. But I can't tell you when that will happen, or even will it happen. Well, obviously, I hope it will happen. Someone said, well, look, when will this all change? I said, when the last patent for the last cholesterol-lowering agent runs out, was when it will change.
Ordinary non-medical folks that want to do a better job of seeing through the doctoring of the data, what would you say they can do?
Read my books. Be skeptical.
Yeah.
I think be skeptical. I sort of start off by saying, how can you one day get a study saying 5 cups of coffee are good for you, and then the next day 5 cups of coffee are bad for you? How can that happen? How can that all be medical research? How can it be correct?
Which one can you believe?
Which one do you believe? All right. And when I did doctoring data, I think the BBC came up to me, and the one thing that I wrote down that they were most astonished by and wouldn't believe was that the body mass index thing, which is 18 to 25 is healthy, 25 to 30 is overweight, over 30 is obese, and whatever stupid figures you come out with. Just made up these figures, by the way. They never had any basis on reality. But I said that the longest life expectancy is associated with a body mass index of between 27 and 29, which is considered overweight. Right? But now that has just been found in study after study after study after study. There's no contradiction to this anywhere. Right? And I went, well, that can't be true because the healthy body weight's 20 to 25. I went, well, if you consider healthy not living as long, fine. I said, what's the difference in life expectancy between 18 to 25 and 25 to 30? I said, it's bugger all, but it's there. All right? And in fact, in Italy, they found that women who lived the longest had a body mass index of 34, which is heading for type 2 clinical obese. And people go, that can't be right. I said, I know you think it can't be right because you've been told by everyone everywhere that being overweight or obese is unhealthy. Yeah. I said, but you see how they get these figures? And this is one thing that they do. So always look for this type of stuff. What they did was they took the groups of people, body mass index 18 to 20, I think it was 18 to 25, 25 to 30, 30 to everything above that. Right? So one group included people who weighed 100 stone and all above that. And therefore, those people aren't, and once you reach a certain point, yes, it's very unhealthy. So you drag the whole figure up, all right? But that's not true. So if you split it again and go 30 to 35, actually between 30 to 35, your health is just as good as it is between 20 and 25, right? And they do this with alcohol as well. So they say, they'll come up with a statistic saying if you have more than 2 drinks a week, I think it's more than 2 drinks a week was the actual figure, you're more at risk of death and heart disease and everything. But what they do again is they split people into groups. One group is doing nothing, the next group is 0 to 1, the next group is 1 to 2, and the next group is 2 and above.
Right.
And they go, surprise, surprise, insensible alcoholics are not doing their health any good. And you're including these people in with these people. So you're distorting the research. So, I mean, that's just one example. They do this all the time. And also just question yourself, the 5 portions of fruit and vegetables. I had a challenge at one time. There's 5 of us spent more of our existences on this planet than we should have, trying to find out where that evidence came from. And the answer is it doesn't come from anywhere. There was never a study. There never is a study. There has been no study to show that 5 portions of fruit and vegetables are healthy.
Really?
Yes.
It's just a marketing thing.
It's just made up. It was just completely made up. It was like a guy down the pub said it. Really? Well, it wasn't. It was a guy at the American Oncology Conference 1976 who just speculated it, right? And it was for cancer. It wasn't for heart disease. There's no evidence for this. I think it's what is it now? 7. It's 9. It's 11. The guidelines for alcohol consumption. Richard Smith actually was on the group who created these guidelines, and he said in his immortal words, "We just made it up. There is no evidence for these guidelines." It is the sort of thing people go, "Well, there must be." You're talking rubbish. I said, "Okay, find it." I'll guarantee you can't because I've looked for it and I know how to look, all right? And I really know how to look, okay? Spent 4 years of my life looking for medical information. The whole salt thing as well, salt's bad for you. Rubbish, salt's good for you. In fact, a lack of salt, again, the data are out there, but they contradict the narrative. There's a thing called the nutritional study in America. What shows is that the highest rates of mortality are associated with the lowest consumption of salt. Right? It's just a fact. That doesn't absolutely necessarily mean that lack of salt is bad for you, because there may be other reasons for that, but it sure as hell doesn't mean salt is bad for you. And then you look at if you start looking at the actual medical statistics and not the medical statistics, the actual science of what happens when you restrict salt intake, it's really quite damaging to you. If you restrict salt intake, your kidneys do everything possible to maintain sodium and chlorine in your body. They release hormones to stop it being excreted, and those hormones have really nasty effects on your lining of your arterial blood vessels. Really nasty. Angiotensin 2, look it up. It's really bad for you. So it's actually, we're damaging people more likely than not. And then we have things like sun exposure. So sun exposure is bad for you. No, it's not. We're told an awful lot of things as absolute facts that when you look for the evidence, it just doesn't exist, right? And when you find it, there's a sort of thing, I spend ages looking just to make sure, well, maybe there's a paper, maybe I'm missing this paper of papers amongst papers, and someone's going to call me an idiot and go, have you not read that? And I go, God, you're right, I haven't read that. It doesn't happen, because when the real big seminal paper comes out, all right, there will be a lot of noise made about it. I won't miss it, okay? Because I've got hundreds of people around the world who keep sending me far too much stuff ever to read, going, have you read that? And I go, oh, no, I haven't. Oh, right, thanks for sending it to me. And the sunlight thing, they did a study in Sweden, where they looked at women and they put them into 5 groups. No sun exposure to sort of sun lizard who lies out in the sun all day, every day, and quite a lot of sun exposure, etc., etc. What they found was that women had no sun exposure, right? They increased their risk of premature mortality, dying early, right, by as much as smoking 20 cigarettes a day.
No.
So sun exposure is incredibly good for you, right? It's probably one of the healthiest things you can do.
It's vitamin D.
It's lots of other things. Vitamin D, definitely. There's things like nitric oxide, there's just a million things that sunlight does. Just, as I say to people, you know that shiny thing up there? It's been shining down on us for 4 billion years. All of life emerged under the shiny thing. And you're saying that life is damaged by the shiny thing? Have you heard of evolution? Come on. It's nonsense. And in fact, the 2 groups of people in the UK who have the least malignant melanoma, that's the form of skin cancer you don't want. There's others like rodent ulcers and BCCs. The 2 with the least malignant melanomas were construction workers, outside construction workers and farm workers, right? And what they found in people who'd had malignant melanomas, who'd had them removed, who were then monitored, the ones who had the most sun exposure had the least recurrence and the least incidence of new malignant melanomas. Sun exposure protects against malignant melanoma. There's papers about this by dermatologists in the UK who said we might have to rethink our advice in this area. So this is where the statistics, they go, it increases the risk of skin cancer, and they go, yes, but there are many forms of what you call skin cancer. There's malignant melanoma, which are the really bad ones that will kill you. But you can get them in your esophagus. You don't need any sun exposure to get a malignant melanoma. You can get them. A friend of mine's mother died of malignant melanoma in the lining of the inside of her nose. I said, what did she do? Lie there with mirrors pointing up there. But you can get, you've heard of, there's other forms of cancer. It's called basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma and actinic keratosis. Now, these are more common in pale-skinned people who get excess sun exposure. But they add those figures together with malignant melanoma and go, the risk of skin cancer is increased with sun exposure. True. But the other ones you can get removed quite easily. You can see them and you can just chop them out. Okay, you don't want them, I agree with that. And yes, if you're pale-skinned and you live in Australia or South Africa or whatever, you need to take a bit of more care of your skin. But for us in the north, the evidence is that actually the risk has gone up because we've been protecting ourselves and putting sunscreen on, and sunscreen might actually be a trigger for skin cancers. Right, there is evidence for this that is quite impressive, okay? So the things we're being advised to do are actually potentially damaging us. Now, I know all the dermatologists out there will be screaming, if any of them watching, they'll be screaming at me and telling me I'm going to cause 1,000 million deaths and I'm damaging the lives of thousands or hundreds of thousands of millions of people by saying this. I know they will do this, all right? They are wrong. Dermatologists see malignant melanomas, which is a horrible disease, and they treat it. And they've been told again and again it's due to excess sun exposure. But they do not know this. And if they looked at the evidence, they would find it is not true. But they are absolutely convinced that it is. You will never change their mind on this. It is impossible. They will not look at the research. They will not look at the data. And it's the same with the cholesterol thing. So you get these ideas. The salt thing, again, as a professor, whatever his name is, that keeps attacking me, McDonald, for saying eat salt, it's good for you. I've had dermatologists attack me for saying go out in the sun, don't burn yourself because it's horrible, and it probably does cause certain types of skin cancers. You know, and everyone shouts at me for the cholesterol thing and go, you're talking rubbish. It's like, well, argue with me with some facts, please. Don't just scream at me because you've got a belief that you don't know where it came from, that doesn't come from anywhere. So, yes, you have to be pretty thick-skinned and probably super arrogant or something to go, bleh. I don't care what you experts in dermatology say. I'm right, you're wrong, you know. But I do look at I don't say to you, I don't come out with these things, I don't pluck them from thin air. I look at the evidence and then I say, you're wrong on the evidence that exists. Maybe you'll do a study that proves that I'm completely wrong, but at the moment I don't see them. So how do people do it? Well, I think you have to say is when you see an absolutely concrete thing that no one's ever arguing with, go and have a look, see if there's another. AI Google's very good for this now. You put a question into AI Google. I put a question to AI Google saying, Google, are clots responsible for heart disease? I went, yes, blood clotting is responsible for heart disease. Google knows it. It's funny. It answers all the questions. I said, well, that's obviously, Google is picking out all the information from everywhere around, all right? It's not making it up. It can't make it up. It just has to use what's there. And Google will answer these questions, all right? And in fact, now if you start Googling, you know, cholesterol and heart disease, this is an area of considerable debate and blah, 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 you know. So maybe that's not where you should get your information, but go and have a look. Find out if there's other people out there. And have a read and think, well, they're talking rubbish. Or, no, this guy's actually seems to be making sense. All right? And then don't go and ask your doctor because you'll just get the mainstream thing absolutely 100% undiluted. This is bad for you, that's bad for you, all that stuff. That's not where you're going to find your information from. So it's tricky because then you have to have the confidence to go, oh, you know, if I say to someone, or someone says I'm terrified of stopping my statins because they're creating a shield of protection around me, and were I to switch it off, I would immediately die of a heart attack. I can understand people think that because they're bombarded with that message. And fear is a terribly difficult thing to overcome, isn't it? So kiddie steps, one step at a time. Find out for yourself, have a think, and trust yourself to understand this. All right? Don't go, because if you've got a brain and you're interested, you can work this out yourself. Don't necessarily take it from me. I can just say, here's a few signposts. I can ask you to follow the routes if you want. Off you go. But find out for yourself a bit, and don't be unquestioned.
Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.